So why don't we get started here, folks? So first, like I said, good afternoon. Thank you for being here. We sure do appreciate it. And so Dr. Watson's going to present part 3, called Exercising Management Roles of Frontline Leadership. Join us for next month's webinar when we're going to have Paul Akers, who is a name that probably many people know. If not, if you just search 2-second lean on Google, you'll find plenty about Paul Akers. He is a self-described lean maniac, and he is going to present on the topic of lean is simple, and he sure does make it seem simple. So that's great. Also in June, we have part 4 of Dr. Watson's series, and the topic is going to be called Elevating Individual Responsibility Through Motivation. So I think that's also going to be interesting. I will chat the registration link for next month in the control panel. It's not there yet, but I will get it. Also, too, if you guys go to YouTube and start looking this up on the LED video channel, you'll find links to all the outstanding webinars as well, if you're wondering where registration links are. If this is your first time joining us, or if it's been a while, then we know you're here to gain lots of knowledge, and as a side note, to gather that 10th of an RU that you get. So here's how you will get it. Within 24 hours after the webinar, you will receive an RU certificate or certificate of attendance. If you have not, please feel free to hit me up, Manny Veloso, and probably in your email inbox already. So that should be fairly simple. Also, too, we are going to be recording this session, and it will be posted on YouTube Friday or Saturday. Let's count on Saturday. Friday is a little busy before the holiday for me. So we'd love you to ask questions, but I will tell you this, forget questions, just put them in the chat so that it's easier. It's one less thing to have to look at. So if you have any questions, please put them in the chat for us. That would be very convenient. Here is a little bit of an introduction to Dr. Watson. I'm not going to read this out to you unless you all beg me to. I will say that he is a very prestigious speaker and thinker, and we are thrilled to have him here with this series on for LED. So you can see he's just done an awful lot of things. He's won many of the major awards that are possible in the quality CI world, and like I said, we're really thrilled to have him. So what I'm going to do now is turn it over to Dr. Watson, and okay, I do believe that the time is yours. Let me stop. Okay, yeah. Pretty sure you're driving the bus there, Dr. Watson.
Welcome. Exercising management roles of frontline leadership. We're going to cover 3 particular topics today and 3 learning objectives. So first we're going to talk about, we talked briefly about the Toyota production system last time. And what we're going to do is we're going to talk about Nihon Teki Hinshitsu Kanri. That is Japanese style quality control or quality management systems. So we'll talk first about all of the elements in a Japanese quality system. And then we'll talk about the 5 rules that they have in terms of defining standardized work. And then we'll talk about frontline leaders and how they work. And that'll give us our introduction to the next component in this lecture series, which is going to deal with motivation and the Japanese psychology of work. So this first component, we're going to talk about team-based work environment and Hinshitsu Kanri, the concept of Nichijo Kanri, Jisu Kanri, and how you apply Kotai Kanketsu. So a lot of this Japanese stuff, I'm doing this on purpose because when I received the Deming Medal in 2009, the Japanese said, please explain what we do, not what professors say we do. So I'm using this as basically the original concepts from Japan in the Japanese. So the Japanese process of developing workers, they deliver quality in a routine way of doing it. So Nihon Teki means Japanese style. So Nihon is Japanese, Teki is style. Hinshitsu Kanri. So Hinshitsu is a word for quality. It's a natural or a normal state, and it's delivering the results on target in a consistent manner. Kanri is a general word for management system, and we'll see it appearing many, many times as they talk about how they put things together. And we'll see that basically Japanese organizations run as a Kanri of Kanri, or a system of systems. Nichijo Gemba is the daily or routine work, and Gemba is the place where that work is done. So when we're looking at this, what we're going to be seeing is a collaborative work environment. And this is how they put together all of the things that they're actually doing in their organization. It's also working together for a common purpose. So they all are focusing on the same aim, the same direction, and each of them is contributing their part to achieve an overall benefit. Now, the Japanese call this approach monozukuri. It's the art, science, and craft of making things. So it has a purpose of delivering value to customers. So an art is a product of conscious application of human creative imagination, and it's used to express some conceptual idea through technical efficiency in applying some sort of artistic media. Science, on the other hand, is a systematic approach to building and organizing a body of knowledge in a form of testable explanations and predictions about its particular object of study. Craft is a profession practiced by skilled laborers who gain specialized knowledge by informal tinkering and trials, sort of the trial and error method, to determine a best way of doing something to meet their own standard. And this is actually the Nihon Teki approach to manufacturing. Now we take a look at this, we see that the work that produces value is what the Japanese want. Seiyo means work. And when we combine Seiyo with Hojun, it means standard work. But standard work, according to Toyota, is about talk time, work sequence, required work in process. It does not include things like process capability, work instructions, which are actually happening at the individual station. So it's only about the way that you combine individual work cells into a line or a cell to be able to do something more than what individual workers do alone. The idea of valuating work, or true work, is called shijito. And shijiko is actually work that produces value. So often we talk about work in it's part of a production flow. And not every activity provides value that's appreciated by the customers. So often we mean this to work in the sense of doing one's job, or doing chores when we talk about work. But what they're talking about is work in the terms of physics. In physics, we talk about work as force multiplied by motion. So without motion, there is no work. So in Japan, all work follows flows. They have 7 flows. And when work flows smoothly, it represents a healthy process. And that fact is called the constructal law in biology. So job instructions are created by workers, and for workers to standardize and improve discipline in human movement in performing tasks. That's in Gemba 1. However, standard work is managing the flow. That's the job of the supervisor in Gemba level 2. So we start seeing at the very beginning, as we start talking about work, there are distinct areas of responsibility for assignment of work ownership. Taiichi Ohno talked about this idea of standard work in his book, Workplace Management. And he said that standards should be constantly changing. And he says, if you think of standard as the best you can do, it's all over, because that means the standard never changes and you can't have Kaizen. So a standard is only a basis for having further improvements, or Kaizen. And he says, it's Kaizen if things get better, and it's Kayaku if things get worse. So standards are set arbitrarily by human beings. Every standard is arbitrary. Should they change? How should they change? And we're talking about standard work. It's difficult to say established if you say that's the one best way. So that means it cannot change. Taiichi Ohno says it's a big mistake. Document exactly what you're doing now. If you make it better, that's Kaizen. If you don't make it better, then the motivation for Kaizen will be wrong. That's why one way of motivating people is to do Kaizen is to create a poor standard at the beginning. Just document something. Don't make it too bad, but without some standard, you can't say, or the people can't say, we made it better, because there's nothing to compare it to. So old standards are ways to compare ourselves and challenge what we should do better. And we see there's 2 possible outcomes of work. So one is Kaizen, changing it for the better, and the other is Kayaku, which means changing it for the worse. So notice that the first Kais are the same. That means actually literally means to break something apart and investigate it. Aku means that the change is for the bad. Zen implies improvement of the prior existing situation. So work outcomes are developed depending on how well the processes are studied and understood. So at the very beginning, we have to understand things. And we see that these individual work instructors are about the jobs of individual people. And here we see another Kanri coming in. It's called Jisu Kanri. And what this means, it's self-mastery management system. That means every worker is an inspector. Every worker is doing their work. They have two jobs: do their work, inspect their work, actually three jobs, and improve their work. So this is what we call self-regulated or an autonomous work system with voluntary participation, self-control of the working systems in Japanese companies. Jisuken, see the same root at the very beginning, the first two characters are the same. Jishu Ken is actually called a second set of eyes. And that's when we have somebody coming in and looking at what you're doing and giving you feedback. So if workers are doing their own work, it's hard to actually evaluate, am I doing it right? So in every system, there is somebody looking over your shoulders as a checker, if you will. And when you learn how to do things, you'll start seeing that this is built into this frontline management system we're going to talk about. So one job of workers is to help each other so they can achieve harmony in the flow. Getting the flow right is the purpose of all of their common aims, and that's the responsibility of the supervisor. So we see ownership of work creates worker pride. So we're changing the worker's attitude from doing a job to producing value. And so monozukuri is this basic activity in manufacturing, and it's producing value from things for customers. Hitozukuri is the way to achieve improvement in a daily work process by producing value in people. And this means developing the potential of workers. So that's their education, their training, helping them to be self-sufficient so they become self-aware of their processes and can actually control what they're doing. So they're moving from conscious incompetence, if you will, to unconscious competence. And so as we start moving here, they're going beyond production. So they're not just a pair of hands, or as Taiichi Ohno calls them, fast hands. So what they're doing is they're applying their human capabilities in an imaginative way of working by enjoying their head and their thinking processes and engaging them in their work. Kotozukuri is a third thing. And this is a desired new productive state. And here what we're doing is we're producing value from knowledge for society. So let me give you an example of this. Monozukuri is Toyota making a car. Hintozukuri is the process by which they develop people to do new things. Kotozukuri is where they start selling mobility as a service. So they're not making just a car, they're developing the whole service and changing the whole process of ownership. And this is the current strategy of Toyota, getting away from just producing iron to giving a service to society. So the goal is to transform from monozukuri to kotozukuri. And this is a transition from creating customer value by making things to creating value for society from knowledge. So this is why this idea of digitalization, this idea of new technologies coming together, information technologies driving production, this is why this is so important, because that becomes the enabler for changing the value proposition to a social value proposition for all of humanity. And this is achieved through a process called nemawashi. So one vision is achieved through negotiated objectives. So we set targets for means and ends. And it lays a foundation for proposed changes in projects. So here we see a Japanese man who is planting a tree, okay? And the whole process of nemawashi means going around the roots. It comes from ni or root and masasua, which means to go around something. So literally it's the carefully digging of the roots of the tree to provide it for a transplant. So we're doing the same thing. We're putting people who've been carefully prepared and trained into organizations to allow them to have a more productive environment in the future. Now, Shiso is the outcome of a lifelong learning system. And when we take people into this system, we have a number of things we refer to. So takume is a workman who is underdeveloped. So this is an artisan or a workman who's on a journey to become a master craftsman, a practitioner of the art, crafts, or science of monozukuri. They go to the dojo, and that's the place of immersive learning. It's the place of the way where you learn to become a master. So that's both the classroom and it's also on the production line. They learn the kata, which is a disciplined way of working. And so this is the form or technique that is structured in a way of doing things. It's trained by drills until it becomes internalized. And then we find dantotsu. That means to be the best of the best. That's the objective of this learning system. And finally, we find chiso. This is the role of the person who is leading this particular outcome. It's the master, the teacher, the coach. This is the person who is leading this whole organization of learning to the highest level. And so we see in the Toyota system that the Gemba is the dojo. Now, Hitozukuri is the process by which we make this transition from monozukuri to kotozukuri, and it's an incremental mastery of a particular craft. We start as a kyoshi. That means it's a profession as a teacher. I'm teaching anything. I could be teaching you how to cut vegetables. We become a sensei, and that means one who comes before. So usually it's a teacher or an elder who's developing some particular experience in a way of doing things. And after that, we have also a sito. That's the student, one who's in training under a sensei. And also we see that we can have a deshe, who's a disciple or an apprentice, and also a kohai. This is a junior who's being trained and mentored. And we can see relationships between the junior, kohai, and senpai, which is the senior employee who's acting as the mentor. And finally, we see shiso. This is the master who's guiding them on this journey. And finally, we have anshi. And this is at the end. So an anshi is one who is given a valuable gift. They're not just a sensei or a shiso, but their teaching is highly cherished. My anshi is Dr. Kano. I've been working with him for over 35 years. And we've learned many valuable things in lectures, but more so in individual conversations, being in each other's homes, having dinners, having a glass of wine at the bar. And so what we see is every workman, starting at the kyoshi and going through this training processes of takimi, actually comes to the point where they are developed to their maximum potential. And that is the objective of the training, education, and learning systems that are built into all of Japanese manufacturing. Now, we see that after you've learned, you understand the kata, you've got that way of dealing with things, that there's still 3 levels of development. And that's called shu, ha, and ri. So shu means keeping. That means you can actually follow the kata of the master without being coached. So you're independent. You understand how to do these things. Ha means you break away and you're taking personal responsibility and you've been delegated decision rights so you can analyze and improve and make better that application. Ri means you've so internalized this going away that you can extend the master's kata by innovative breakthroughs, new ideas, philosophies that add value to the whole process. And so this is developing value through people. And as we look at this, we can illustrate this with this concept that comes out of this joke I told this last time about 4th generation sushi. So Dr. Kano told this joke, and he said basically that 1st generation sushi is when we see that the sushi is prepared by a Japanese chef in Japan, so they follow the kata. 2nd generation sushi was prepared by a Japanese chef in America, so he can now do this work independently. 3rd generation sushi is the American chef who can take it and do it in America, and so they've adapted the master's Japanese style to their own culture. 4th generation sushi is this ri, and this is the breakaway or actually doing something different. So it's the American going to Japan and using beef instead of fish. Now in this, we have to be careful not to lose significant process information as we develop our improvement methods. So don't oversimplify in this rush, if you will, to improve. And as Dr. Dr. Deming said, don't copy, adapt. Excuse me, this is my third speech today, so I'm losing a little bit of my voice. First seek to understand, and then you can adapt from that point in time. So another component of this is J-Kotai Kanketsu, and this is owning your own actions. It's a concept of process ownership. And here we see workers are supported in daily management to take responsibility for what they do. And this happens at every level, at the individual worker, at the manager, and at the executive level. And so we see quality responsibility is shared. Everyone is responsible for the quality of their own work and for the work of those who are in their team. So the objective is WA, that means peaceful unity, conformity in work, where all the members prefer continuation of this harmonious flow over their personal interest. So workplace vitalization makes it come alive. It's humanizing work. So people understand how they work as an individual and how they work collectively. So we put this all together as a system. We see we have a group of individuals that are practicing Jisoo Kanri, that's this individual self-regulated management system, and they come together and they then do Jisuken and are practicing J-Kotai Kanketsu. So Jisukens are the team activities like quality circles, a project team like a Six Sigma project, those are Jisuken teams. A steering committee by a management team is a Jisuken. And then they practice this process of ownership. And so this is collaborative work by shared ownership. And then another team is actually building up this into the daily management system. That's Nichijo Kanri. So they're working standards to improve. And then the final outcome is another management system called Hinshitsu Kanri, and that is establishing the control of the management system to achieve the quality outcomes and results that are required of the business. So this collaboration is actually this Kanri of Kanris. We see Jisoo Kanri, Nichijo Kanri, and Hinshitsu Kanri. And when we come back to our fifth lesson, we'll see there are even more of these elements in the Japanese management system. So what I want to do now is review this SDCA daily work cycle so we can understand how do we actually create this standardized work that creates the flows. Now remember when Taiichi Ono was talking about it, he said, get something documented first and then improve it. So the first thing that we do is we make a rule. And this is supervisory responsibility, is guide the workers in definition of simple, easy to apply job instructions. Find integrating methods that create standard work for the process. And as Taiichi Ono said, you've got to assume that things are a mess. And somehow we have to step by step improve them, one step at a time. Workers' responsibility here is to collaborate with their colleagues to define their job instructions in simple language. So this is facilitated by a supervisor. And then the next thing we see is we're teaching the rule. And again, this is conducted by the supervisor. And the supervisor's responsibilities train all the workers in the agreed upon rules of production, ensure the workers are capable to execute those rules in real world situations. Worker responsibility here is to participate in the training and concentrate on how to apply the rules at work. We come to the third is keep the rule. And this is performed by the workers. So this is the do function in standardized do check act. This is where we spend 80% of the time in a work process. Supervisor responsibility here is Jisuken, be the second set of eyes, monitor the workers to assure compliance, and provide refresher training of session issues if there are some issues or concerns that come up. Worker responsibility is they start with a point and say approach. So at the very beginning, they have to embed the process into their body in every dimension. So what they will do is they will point at something, what they're going to do on a work instruction. They will say it, read it from the work instruction. They will point at what they're going to do on the job, and then they will do it. And they are being supervised in this process by a fellow worker who's more senior in them, and we'll come to that role in just a little bit. And then the check rule is also going to be something that's performed by both the worker and the supervisor. And so we see the supervisors conducting work audits to assure that the rules are applied in the right manner and remain valid as rules. So are we still using the rules? And then the worker responsibility is to check the quality of their own work as part of their Jisu Kanri. So this approach was called by Shigeo Shingo zero QC. We don't have a QC function or quality control function. The operators assume the responsibility for checking the incoming quality of their work, monitoring what they're doing carefully with the point and say, and then assuring that they're giving the right quality to the next step in the process. Final, it's change rule. And what we see here is this is facilitated by the supervisor. And so the supervisor is actually guiding a team-based approach of workers to evaluate rules and methods that do not appear to be working properly. Worker responsibility is to work with colleagues under the supervisor who is facilitating them to improve quality of production rules for standard work. And we put this all together, what we start seeing is we have this process. So in the beginning, the standardize is really about, it's the Shisuke process at the end of 5S. It's educating and motivating workers. We make the rules, we teach the rules. When we get to the next, this keep rule and check rule, it's Sitan and Sisu, which we talked about last time. Those are the routine operations. That's where workers spend 80% of their time. If they check the rule and everything's fine, they go back to the do step. So then the cycle goes backwards. However, if there's an out of control condition, then they come back to the step 5, and that's change the rule. And this is Seketsu, that is a Kaizen operation. And so as we start seeing, we can have all of those things merging together to understand how the daily management systems actually operate. And as long as the workers have the resources, the responsibilities, and the decision rights, they stay in that SDCA circle. They don't go to PDCA, they stay in the SDCA circle. When they can no longer do improvement or something like this, and they need to have new resources, different responsibilities, or more decision rights to make changes, that's when the PDCA cycle gets exercised. So we'll talk about that again, not in the next lecture, but in the 5th lecture. So process QA is actually in this green box here. It's keep the rule, that's the productive work, and then check the rule. And so what we're doing is we're assigning rules, creating the standard work. Now, the next process, and this is the third part of this, we want to talk about how do we actually develop these frontline leaders? How does this process work? And so the supervisors, we see function as teachers. So how do they actually get to that point? How do the workers get that point? And we see that there's personal responsibility at all levels. So workers accept personal responsibility for achieving quality outcomes, and their J-Kotai Konketsu is taking ownership of the standard work process that achieves a result consistently. The supervisors or the managers delegate responsibility for quality through a set of consistent actions, that's the standard work, and encourage workers to take personal responsibility for the quality of their work. The leaders in the organization develop organizational culture where everyone is actively engaged in this QA concept. So total in TQM means participation by everyone at all levels, in all disciplines, everyone. Nobody's excused or given a right not to participate. And we take a look at this in the 3 Gemba structure of the organization. The first level, the Gemba, the work process, is looking at value delivery. The second is the system, how we put this together. That's the job of the supervisor, getting the flow. That's business emphasis. And then the third level is governance, or how we actually manage and structure the overall business. So the job in governance is leaders improve systems, managers and supervisors improve processes, and workers improve tasks. So each has an improvement responsibility, but the responsibilities differ based on the levels they're working at. So everyone has some unique quality responsibility. So workers are responsible for improving efficiency and quality of their own work. Supervisors are responsible for improving quality of the end-to-end workflows across the process. Functional managers are responsible for cross-functional integration of a collaborative work environment. And executives are responsible for assuring resources have been allocated properly for improvement. And the executive in charge must have an unrelenting intention to pursue improvement of all kinds. Now, if you look at this type of structure compared to the structure that may be in your company, ask yourselves, do your companies actually have similar types of responsibilities where they are taking a look at who is responsible for quality? And what we see here is everyone has a role in this specific CONRE, this quality management system, and how they manage the Gemba. And to get it done, everybody has to do their job. So collaboration across each of those individual responsibilities is essential. Now, they put together their HR systems. Much has been said about Japanese HR systems, calling the people automons, you know, like a humanized robot that they just do the same thing over and over. And traditionally, when we take a look at Japanese HR systems, the job was very rigorously structured based on providing lifetime security and promotions based on seniority. However, in the early 1990s, there were some problems with the Japanese economy that collapsed, and there was the very first time that this lifetime security component was actually stopped by many of the Japanese companies. And it really upset the whole apple cart, and it caused them to have to rethink, how do we actually manage workers? How do we control them? And indeed, how do we pay them? And so we see that there is what's called a national qualification examination. And so here, this monozukuri, the art, science, and technical capabilities of workers are examined at 3 levels. So there's a journeyman level, there is a craftsman level, and then there's a master level. And these tests are administered by professional associations in Japan to demonstrate that people have those capabilities. And what we see is that the new HR system is called Shokunu Shikaku Seido. And that represents a modern system of merit-based pay, where Shokuno means diversified virtues or benefits, Shikato means capabilities, qualifications, or requirements, and Seido means accuracy or precision. So are you doing the job the right way? Do you have the capability to add value? And then we pay you for what you know. So this is the new system in Japan. It's merit-based pay, much more familiar to what is actually happening in most of the rest of the world. And it's a major transformation that organizations in Japan were going through in the 1990s and early 2000s. When I was working with the executive team at Toshiba in 1991 to 2001, this was part of the major transformation of Toshiba, was changing the way they did the workforce management process. And what we start seeing is that people become a flexible resource. And so one part of this new management system is called Shojinka, and this means flexible staffing. So workers are then trained to work across in many different jobs. And so we're getting away from the concept of linearity of workers in a similar job, but that we can be moved around to different places, retrained and so forth. And so people can perform in different areas, so everyone understands all of the different works, and we have more flexibility in how we assign people. And one of the things we see is that the process of work is changing to one called Nagara. So Nagara means multitasking, or doing more than one thing while doing something else. So it means doing more than one thing at a time. And here we see that when Nagara is being used, typically they've divided the work into actions by people and actions by machine. And in this sort of thing, machines may be doing one thing while people are doing another. So if we're using Nagara and it creates waste or defects, then there's no efficiency gain and the benefit's illusionary. Otherwise, we're getting benefits because machines are being kept busy, whereas the workers are supporting them. And so we see cross-training, multitasking, increasing worker flexibility, and also giving agility in terms of how we do planning of production. So in Gemba 1, the workplace, this is the Nichijo Kanri, we see that there's different responsibilities of the workers. And their job is basically boils down to these 2 things: do the work and improve the work. And we take a look at the line lead, we see that this is this concept of a water beetle. So you may have heard of Mizumashi, the water beetle, or the water strider. What we see is that this little creature here has a very interesting set of physics about it. He should not be able to float on top of the water, but his system of distributing weight is such that the force is now that's coming down from gravity from his weight is distributed well across the water in very different places. So we see there's 6 different places where he's connected to water, such that the resistivity of the water is less than, it's greater than, if you will, the weight that is distributed by the water strider. So he literally can walk on water because of that distribution system. And so we start taking a look at this, and we start seeing that when work operations start getting more and more efficient, we sometimes will take a line lead. Their job is monitor the workers, do the audits of standard work, support workers if they're having intermediate problems, and they act also as, in many organizations, a supervisor and trainer. This is a line lead who's mastered the craft of all of those stations. They understand all of the materials, all of the parts, so they're highly capable individual, and they're cross-trained throughout everything. And so we see in this system that promotions are earned based on merit and achievement of work qualifications, not based on seniority. So the idea is, if you want to get ahead and ultimately be a supervisor, do the cross-training so you can get to the point where you become the water spider. Now, the supervisory function needs to be engaged in daily work practice and encourage workers so they're enthusiastic. So what we see is that workers have to develop pride in their performance, joy in work. And stimulating workers' desire is what supervisors do to create harmony in work. And so the job of the supervisor is to train them in the fundamental skills, to do the job at a level of competence where it can be done, and with the required quality. So if they observe a worker who can't do things, they take the water spider and ask them to take that job over. They take the worker then, and they retrain them on the spot, because there is a dojo on the Gemba. So if you go into Toyota, the dojo is 3 layers up above the production line. So they'll go up to there, and there is a simulated workstation, and the supervisor will drill them on the process. So they get back in the cadence of what they know, and they don't then forget it forever. They can then practice it when the supervisor is feeling that that person now is able to do it on their own. They go back to the line, then the water strider supervises them as they go through the process to make sure that they're going, and then the person's left on their own. So supervisors assign responsibility to workers, and they provide them with the resources to do their jobs properly. So we see from all of this conversation, Japanese supervisors have very different job descriptions from most of their Western counterparts. And I think this is one of the key distinctions in what makes Japanese quality and Japanese management system very different than Western systems. So Taiichi Ono talked about this role of the supervisor in his workplace management book. He said, in Japan, it said, time is a shadow of motion. In most cases, delay is generated by difference in operator motion and sequence. That's flow. The job of the supervisors is to change the workers in flow. At the same time, workers must be taught to help each other, collaboration. Carrying out standard work methods in the cycle time helps worker harmony, WA, the outcome of flow, everything peaceful and no drama or crises in the production line. That keeps worker harmony grow. So the job of the supervisor is to make sure that the workers are trained, facilitate problem solving, and encourage workers. So it's their job to stimulate enthusiasm about work among those workers. And we're going to see more about that when we talk in our next lecture, where we talk about this idea of psychology and the motivation of workers. Now, there is another process here called the Ringi system, or Ringi Seido. And so this is a shared decision-making process. And what happens is we have this process where we go back and forth and we're sharing the process. So Ringi decision-making process fosters an environment of support and agreement. So the conversations move back and forth, and as a result of this dialogue, the thoughts of the workers are embedded in the management's mind before he makes a decision. So this is a process that encourages consultation between the managers and the people at the working levels. So after the manager with finalized authority has reviewed this dialogue, then they accept a recommendation, but that recommendation has had the participation of all of those involved in that system. And that then leads to much more compliance. So it's not the giving and taking of orders, it's identifying how do we collaborate about what is the way we want to achieve this. So we come to Gemba 2, we can summarize what it is that the supervisor's doing. And we see that it comes down to 2 things. They train the workers, they make sure the workers can do the job, and then they manage the flow. So two very distinct ingredients in how we manage. And if we take a look at this as a learning system, and this will go into more in our next week process, that everything starts with process action. We learn from doing, and we start seeing, we take a look at the results, okay? Gemba 1 decisions are like problem solving. How do we actually have learning from the process? That's called single loop learning, looking at the content of the tasks. Are we doing things right? Gemba 2 is about business learning. And this is, are we doing the right things? Do we have the right priorities, or are we off on our priorities? And therefore, we're messing up the flows. So that's looking at process content and process outcomes. So the first Gemba is looking at tasks, second at process. The third Gemba is a cultural learning, and this is about how do we decide what's right? How do we point the ship in some direction? How are we going to steer this? What's our purpose or our aim? And that's about the strategic content of the organization as a whole. That's cultural learning. That's the job of Gemba 3 or the executive team. And so we see that the Gemba is a learning environment at each level, and this is where we learn the lessons because we learn them from what we do. So as we look at this, we start seeing these three levels have all of these different types of things. We want to deliver goodness, kaizen, and prevent the occurrence of badness, kayaku. So the resources of the entire business system are allocated to establish control of quality, safety, flow, and motivation. And at each levels, we have team-based structures, Jisuken, quality circles, project teams, cross-functional teams. And the idea is that education and training are going to facilitate the operation of this whole system at each levels. And so workers have to take these state-sponsored skills examinations to independently validate their ability to work. They're monitored at work by supervisors and the water beetle to assure that they're following standard work and collect their ideas for improvement. Then the supervisors lead them in testing those ideas, say, should we include these new ideas from workers in standard work? And whenever workers have problems with following standards, the supervisor takes them offline to demonstrate can they do it. So on-the-job training reinforces classroom training and education. So the Gemba becomes the dojo. And if we take a look at this, how the worker is developed, we see that when we have level 1, that's the worker coming in off the streets, they're ignorant. So they go through a level of training, and we see that 30% of it is in the first 4 levels. This is basically, we learn knowledge, it's lecture and study, we reinforce it with discussion, we have simulation and instruction, and then we go to on-the-job practice. And 70% is on-the-job practice about standard work. Standard work is about created by education, and the focus is on cost reduction. So this is to establish a process of disciplined work among the workers. Now, we also have how they develop supervisors. And we see that this begins at the level 5 where the workers are a standard process. And we see that the supervisors go through a series of work. So first they have to then be able to standardize and improve the work. So they move from doing this to teaching the standards. So that's Su. And then level 7 is they have to be able to instruct. So that's Ha. That means they've internalized it. And then be able to manage the global culture. This is actually changing the organization. That's Re. And so now they're no longer focused on cost, they're focused on profits. And so the supervisory in function is embedding humanity into daily management and communicating the culture in words and deeds. They live as a role model of the organization. Now, the teaching principles that go involved in this go all the way back to the 1920s in scientific management. So this is a set of 8 different principles of teaching that Paul Hayes published in the Principles of Teaching from Scientific Management in 1925 on the Taylor Society. This is same Frederick Taylor, Principles of Scientific Management. And we see that workers are trained on theory and practice of what they need to do to perform standard work. They're also trained with both mind and hand, so they get their head around it, but they also reinforce it with their physical activities. And training stimulates the real working environment very closely to prepare all the workers for that Gemba. If you ever get a chance to see a training system in Japan, you'll see that they're actually working on a simulated work station, which is exactly the same as what they will have in the real world environment. When I was in the Navy, we were trained on airplanes. We went into simulators, It was exactly the same seat that I sat in on the airplane, exactly the same scope, exactly the same buttons, exactly the same software. So leadership and management is essentially a task of teaching. It's getting people so they understand their Gemba and how they work in that to actually perform things. And there's some focal points for discovering knowledge. 30% of the knowledge comes from formal classes, but 70% comes from the practice of work. And we need to include some time for reflective thinking in our work process so we can stimulate this ability to learn on the job and to get ideas about how to improve. So learning occurs when we fail and correct mistakes, not when we succeed and do nothing. So Kai-Aku is an opportunity for learning. Kaizen is not. If we keep doing the same thing over and over and we don't get any better results, we're not learning. So we have to learn from Kai-Aku and plan for that. And therefore, we should focus on learning about our process using evidence-based measurements and accepting this responsibility for continuous self-development. So continual improvement requires this process of continuous learning. So takeaway summary. Deming made the comment, he said, quality is everyone's responsibility. And this is exactly what this whole concept of Japanese management is built around. And when we build the system to support the workers, we have this question: how do we motivate our workers? It's a process of Jisukanri, self-control, working together in teams, Jisuken, for an objective of harmony or wa. And they have this culture of respect for humanity, Bushido, which you may hear of Code of Warriors, but it's more than that. It's respect for humanity. And this spirit of continual improvement, Kaizen, to keep getting better. Open and honest mind for thinking, that's Sanao. They have this process of reflection, Hansei. And everybody is responsible for owning the quality of their own work, Jei Kotai Kanketsu. So in our next lecture, we're going to talk about the Japanese psychology of work. And so that's going to be on June 24th at 1500. I hope you register for that. You'll start seeing then the sequence of what these lectures are trying to do and how they will overall build this concept of how Japanese quality management is working and how that actually operates and where many of the lean principles that you learn have come from. So thank you very much. Are there some questions?
I will say that in the chat feature that I have the registration link for part 4 of the series. And if folks are looking for the slides, my suggestion is you should copy down this email address or just email Dr. Watson right now. You can see him directly. I'm more than happy to send it to you, but we like our audience to connect with our presenters on a more personal level. So,
and there are also two other handouts that you'll get if you, of course, the slides that I'm not going to tell you what they are.
Okay.
But they're good presents. They're good presents.
Well, I don't think I've seen them yet, so hopefully I'm on that Christmas list.
Send me an email, Manny.
Okay, will do.
Okay.
How about this? Are parts 1 and 2 recorded for those who missed them? Yes. If you go to YouTube, you'll find that I have not only the registration links for all the videos, but also the presentations that are completed. I actually have the link to the video. So if you go to the Lean Enterprise Division channel and then look at the videos, you'll see that. Okay, we're seeing our buddy Ricardo Rios again. Great. Okay, there were some comments. My question to Dr. Watson: do you personally get frustrated when you see numerous organizations not learning, not improving, etc.? And how do you overcome that frustration?
Yes, I get frustrated. Sometimes I drink. That doesn't always work. I get very frustrated when I'm helping to coach them and all of a sudden they decide to go in a different direction. You have to realize cultural change, like what we're talking about here in Japan, it doesn't happen overnight. And many executives have such a short cycle time of interest in things. You know, they think on a quarterly basis, and you can't do lean in a quarter. I can't train operators to be excellent workers in a quarter. You know, you're talking about multiple years. And so that means you have to have some endurance in this, and you have to have stick-to-itiveness. And if you don't have that constancy of purpose, which is what Deming called the same idea, then you won't get there. So if you're always looking for a new fad or a new idea or a new method, or you're something new that came up, you read on some magazine or saw in Harvard Business Review, you'll probably never get there. I gave a speech today in the World Conference, and I gave 6 different case studies, and excellent companies. I know them all personally, and each of them had excellence in 5 to 10 year spurts, and then something happened. Some of them came back to be excellent again, but basically, those are the problems that happen at the cultural or business level outside the organization where we're working on control. We have to remember that quality is a microeconomic concept. It's about control within the firm. So yeah, you can talk about customers and customer point of view and all that, but quality efforts are really inside the company. And so as you start taking a look at that, many things can happen outside, like new technologies, COVID, competitors, economic shifts, and so forth. And quality won't attack those. And so we can have responses to that as corrective actions or preventive actions of those, but it doesn't actually manage those as a process.
Sure. Hey, so we do have a bunch of questions. One of them, speaking of Dr. Deming, is how did Dr. Deming's statistical methods integrate with Japanese cultural traditions?
Not well.
Okay.
In 1964, Dr. Duran gave his lecture on breakthrough management, and the head of the Japanese Union of Scientists and Engineers said, you came to us like your speech was like the smell of fresh air after a spring rain. And what that meant was they were so tired of hearing about statistics here, statistics there, that Deming really never talked about management, not in the way that Japanese people could understand, whereas Duran did. And so Duran tried to shove statistics down that everybody needs to do something. They don't do that in Japan now. So when Toyota teaches statistics, they only teach what you need to know on the job. So workers don't need theory. They don't need hypothesis tests and so forth. They only need what they need to do their job. And that's all they're trained in. And all the examples are about their job, and corner cases and problems that come up are all about the job, how you use these methods to apply to your job. So what Deming wanted to do was he wanted to teach sampling theory and all these other things. That doesn't actually apply to workers. So yeah, it's fine if you're going to be a black belt, but in Japanese facilities, there are in production facilities in Gregory, there are people with black belt equivalents. I haven't gone into their training, but they basically get 2 levels of training. They get a 5-week program, which is equivalent of black belt, and then they get, after that's on process troubleshooting, process design, and then they get another one basically on design for Six Sigma for production processes, which is another 5-week program. But that's after they've been doing the job for 5 years. So there is this still process that we talked about in terms of the sequence of learning. So step by step, you learn it, and you have to have the patience to learn that. So I think that that's probably the best way of looking at this. There are specialists who do statistical work in Japan, certainly, just like there are black belts in many organizations. But most of the workers do not need green belt or anything. They need standardized work. That's what I would call yellow belt. So a yellow belt, I expect to be able to help standardize a process, to know check sheets and the tools that you use for making a job instruction, how to follow it, and how to participate on a team for control of that and improvement of that process.
Sure, great. So we got several excellent presentations. Thank you, Dr. Watson, et cetera, et cetera. Here is a question though, what would be a good beginning to start in a Western company? Where would you start, I guess, in a Western company is the question.
I want the CEO's attention. I don't want him to tell him to do lean. What I want to do is ask him, how is his state of improvement? What is his commitment to improvement that he makes personally? And what is he being held accountable for, and how does he expect to get that done in the organization through the participation of others? So I spend a lot of my time at the executive level working with them to try to understand. And quite frankly, many of them are just scared. They don't know what to do. They've been put in this position. They've gotten at high level. They've never had that kind of decision authority before. And so one of the problems that they often create for themselves is that they say, hey, I was a military officer before, it's going to be command and control, do it my way. That's not actually how these systems work the best. The best is some form of participative management. So I actually have a 20-hour training on very basic quality for executives. And I actually teach that on my Udemy programs. So it's meant for master black belts who are going to be teaching their executives to use that material, but anybody in quality who goes to Udemy can find it.
Gotcha. Okay. There are lots and lots of comments about how wonderful this is, but there are two questions that I think that we could probably handle. Why do you suppose there is such a hesitancy for more companies to incorporate these teachings? It seems like they make sense to increase buy-in from employees. So what stops people? Not invented here?
Well, that is always the case. However, there's other things like participation of who's got the power. So one thing I've seen is if you have conflict between labor organizations, if there's a union there, or if there's a labor who's controlling workflow and job stuff, basically they want to have the power over things. They want to be paid for things and so forth. And I think a lot of the problems come because we haven't actually figured out how to pay people right. And I think that ends up when you see management walking away with massive bonuses and workers struggling. I think those disparities make a very big problem. So you might have in a Western company a 400 times difference between the entry-level factory worker and the executive of a Fortune 500 team in terms of what they get in money in a year. However, can you really say that that guy is delivering that type of value? In most cases, I can't. In Japan, the value difference between the worker and the CEO is only 10 times. And so there's a very big difference in terms of pay, compensation, and therefore there's more willingness to share because there's less fighting.
Gotcha. Okay. Two things. First, for everybody, I've gotten another request. Hey, where can I get the video? I sent out the link just now to the YouTube channel for Lean Enterprise Division. All of our webinars are there, including all of Dr. Watson's. If you click on one of those, if you go down to the description, you'll see all the links that you could use for anything that you want that's actually loaded. This won't be loaded till Saturday. I think one more question, and then I'd say that we're done. And the question is a great one. Dr. Deming said it would take a generation, but that was more than a generation ago. What do we as quality professionals and ASQ do to demonstrate these are critical principles for organizations to succeed? Any thoughts on that?
Well, actually, yeah, lots of them. I just actually helped author with another member of the International Academy for Quality, Quality Manifesto for the 21st Century on revitalizing quality. And what's happened in the last 20 years is that the world around us is changing. Since 2008, we're living in a digital world. Analog systems were basically replaced back then. And quality professionals are living in the past. And as long as we live in the past with methods and tools, we will not be respected. We will be considered out of date, not relevant. And I think that's one of the problems that we have as a community. We have to face up to the fact we have to modernize ourselves, we have to upgrade our skills, and we have to do things differently. And they say that in this digitalization process now that's happening, that about 30% of all jobs will be lost, and many of the quality jobs are actually targeted in that. And so the question is, are we actually preparing ourselves to live in very different environments? And what had been a linear transformation to digitalization, when COVID hit, it accelerated. So only about 20% a year of people were actually moving their companies towards digital technologies before COVID. In the first 6 months, it was almost 67% of organizations looking for digital solutions to almost everything. And the changes are happening so fast, I can't keep up with them. And so this is, I think, this idea of quality 4.0 is, what can we actually do in this new world? I heard a presentation by the CEO of Mercedes-Benz, and he said that quality will become hygiene. And what he meant by that is the robots can handle it, the remote sensors can handle it, AI technologies can handle it. It's hygiene. We don't need people. That should be scary. And what that means is we have to figure out what is going to be our role. How do we redefine our profession in that type of environment? Now, that's not all jobs. It's not all organizations. Most small and medium organizations will not be touched for some time by this idea of quality 4.0 or digitalization. However, large multinationals will be, and they're investing and moving there very, very fast. So we have to understand this future look and really comprehend that as fast as we can. So I've been involved with this Quality 4.0 Summit that the ASQ has had, and I would just encourage all of you to try to understand what that means, because there's two components. Technology is coming, but the other thing is there's a humanized side to that, and how we cope with that is really a great unknown. And so that's part of the thing that we have to think about as quality professionals, how we manage the human side of this transformation process. And so if you do have other questions, send me an email. I'll be happy to answer them. I answer all the emails that I get, and also I send the comments. But I think that this is a very big thing for all of us to be concerned about and to start thinking, how can we contribute to the change that is happening to our community right now?
Yeah, definitely appreciated, Dr. Watson, no doubt about it. For the folks that are still here, just so you know, if you look in the chat, you'll see a bunch of links. Some are to previous recordings of Dr. Watson's series. The one that I just sent out, linked to next month's webinar, that's actually the one for Paul Akers. And again, he's talking on the topic of lean is simple. If you've ever seen him talk, it's really worth doing. Again, if you've got any questions, comments, concerns, want anything from Dr. Watson, there's his email address. I know I'm sort of curious to know about the two presidents that he won't talk about. So you'll be seeing an email from me before long. Folks, on behalf of ASQ's Lean Enterprise Division, I'd like to thank you for your time and attention for another great webinar. And like I said, look for it on the link in the chat for the Lean Enterprise Division video channel by Saturday for sure. All right, folks, enjoy the rest of your day, and thanks for joining. Hope to see you next month. Bye now.
Bye-bye.